and talk about how we have to shift the culture around our environment and our relationship to Earth. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to share my work and some of the grounding philosophies about why I do this. And I'm excited that you all got to read the essay and All We Can Save. And then we're going to have time for questions as well. So let me go ahead and share. Great. So the foundational idea in the essay, and really that informs my work, is that culture is power. And culture shapes our perceptions of the world around us. It shapes our perceptions of each other, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the natural world, where we live, our gender identity. All of that is shaped by culture. And, you know, as human beings, we have been engaging in culture since the beginning of time, whether it's sitting around a fire and telling stories or drawing on a cave. And we have created stories and myths that have then organized our societies and have organized how it is that we build our communities. And so as human beings, we are actually a very cultural species in the sense that stories unite us and they move us. And so stories, art, images, music, dance is all a very, very deep part of our identities. And it's also something that we don't always think about as a powerful tool for social change. In my essay, I talk about that, you know, culture is really something that we're missing in our toolbox around climate, because it's culture and specifically storytellers that are going to allow us to shift our mythology and imagine a future where we can thrive with nature. So we have to include artists and culture makers in our climate movement. And we actually have to build a cultural strategy. And I'll talk about what I even mean by cultural strategy. I want to acknowledge first that I am speaking to you from the unceded land of the Ohlone people, the Ramaytush Ohlone. And, you know, in true storytelling fashion, I want to start my story that I'm going to share today about where I live and the land that we are all on. So we are on this land base, which is called the Americas today, but it's really a land base that was shaped by stolen land and stolen labor. Over 500 years ago, colonizers arrived and they committed genocide against about 90% of indigenous people. And it's then when the climate crisis began, when you had the just devastating destruction of ecosystems and of the people who stewarded these ecosystems, right? We had the extinction of animals. We had indigenous wisdom wiped out. And after that happened, there was stolen bodies from Africa brought to also be exploited, right? And to also exploit the earth. When we think about the industries that created the wealth in this country, the cotton industry, right? Tobacco, all of that was because of the exploitation of bodies. And I say this because, you know, my comrades, the indigenous people who are protecting the Amazon, talk about that colonization caused the climate crisis. When you have an ideology that is worldwide that says that you can go and exploit and extract resources, including human beings, for the consolidation of wealth and power, that is where this problem began. And it's important that we talk about it in that way, because it's actually the truth of our history, and also that it's that same ideology that allowed for you know, countries like England and France to also go to Africa and ravage their land and to take and to destroy ecosystems, which we are paying the price for today. So when we talk about storytelling, we have to think about what is the core story that is driving the systems that we have today. I want to share a little bit about where I grew up. I grew up in Oakland, California. I am the daughter of Peruvian immigrants, the first in my family to be born in the United States. And since I was a child, I love to make art. I love to express myself. I am the descendant of Afro-Peruvians. And, you know, when we talk about what happened on these lands in this hemisphere that we call the Americas, slavery did not just happen in the United States, it happened through all out Latin America. And so as a Latinx person today, it's important for me to uplift that, because it's something that we don't always talk about, and we don't share in our storytelling. And I was a young artist, and I was growing up during the era of the war on drugs. There was a lot of violence in my community, police brutality, and there was also an invisible force that was causing a lot of asthma. And back then, you know, we didn't know what that was, but what it was pollution. And it was pollution because the freeway that I live next to, which you can see on this image on the left, is where a lot of trucks pass by. And just 2 miles up from my home, in a largely white community, there's another freeway, but people in that neighborhood organized so that the trucks would not go through their communities. As a result, my community receives and continues to receive, because I live in the same place in which I grew up, the overwhelming brunt of emissions. And so when I was a kid and I would notice that a lot of kids around me had asthma, I didn't really understand why. But today I understand why. And it's one of the reasons why I've become a climate activist, because for over 40 years, you know, this freeway, they began to allow it to disproportionately have trucks pass by in 1970. And so it's been over 50 years of pollution, mostly targeting Black and brown people. And for me, it's important to connect the dots that climate catastrophe is a consequence of colonization and of structural racism, right? Because this is what the oil industry does. It pollutes, and you can't have an energy system based on oil extraction without pollution. There are people who have to inhale that pollution. These oil refineries have to go in certain neighborhoods, and they go in communities of color, or they go on Indian lands, right? And if you notice in Alameda, the pollution kind of stops. It gets a lot better. Well, that's because there's a waterway. So as I was growing up, hip hop was being born. You could still feel the energy of the Black Panthers, and that was very inspiring to me, because it taught me that no matter what, no matter how harsh the conditions are, that art and culture can give us the tools to tell our stories and to speak out. And so that's what inspired me to become an artist, is that I knew I had a story to tell. I knew that my community was neglected, it was poisoned and continues to be poisoned, like many communities of color, and that there are certain bodies, you know, and those bodies are Black bodies, Indigenous bodies, brown bodies, even animal bodies, ocean bodies, forest bodies, that pay the price in climate catastrophe. And I wanted to use my art to bring about attention to what was happening, and also to share what was going on in my community. So one interesting thing, this is something we have, a tool here we have in California. It's called the CalEnviro screen. And we have this tool because of environmental justice fights that allows us to measure the pollution in our neighborhoods. I don't know if you all have this kind of tool where you live in your community, but we demanded it. And so we have it now. But I want to show you, you know, Oakland, my neighborhood, which is largely a immigrant and Black neighborhood. And I want to show you Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, which is also an immigrant neighborhood. And look at this is what communities of color look like in California. You can type in Compton and get the same view. You can type in Fresno and get the same perspective. And yet when I type in a more affluent, wealthy community, their air is green. This is environmental racism. And for me as an image maker, it's very important to show people, because when you see things like this, you can't deny that environmental racism is happening. And so as somebody who is an impacted community, I believe, and as an artist, I believe that we need to help our earth heal while we are also fighting against systemic issues. And one of the things I love to do is I love to garden. My community also has had lead in the soil. And so one way that we are building resilient communities is by gardening and really, helping to heal the soil, literally breaking through the cement and helping the soil heal. As an artist, I make a lot of art about climate justice, because I think that climate is really the intersection of all the issues. It's the intersection of gender, of race, of age. It is something that is disproportionately going to harm poor people, and of course people of color, not just here in the United States, but all throughout the world. It is the nations that have produced the least amount of emissions are the ones suffering right now. Places like Pakistan, which are still underwater, after floods. And so as an artist, I always want to bring attention and especially inspire communities of color to get engaged in the climate crisis, and to get engaged in climate movements, because, for a long time, and even growing up, I was always into nature, although my parents didn't really take me camping. I live in a place that's largely cement. And that's because, again, land use policies, racist land use policies, put communities like mine in cities with a lot of cement, and with very little trees. And so for me, it's so critical that we help educate folks on the realities of climate injustice. And so this is a piece I did for the People's Climate March in 2014. Always in my characters, I center BIPOC femmes, and I use imagery to call attention to what's happening. So one of the philosophies that I talk about in the essay is how social change happens, and that culture is actually a place where change happens very fast. So there are three realms in which social change can happen: the cultural realm, the political realm, and the economic realm. And of course, a lot of us are used to the political realm. We know that the people we elect, the people in office, the people at the Supreme Court, they have a lot of influence over the laws that dictate and impact our lives, whether that's laws around wages, around student debt, where, whether or not the EPA can protect us against poisonous materials. So much is decided in politics, and we know that. That's something people generally know. The economic sector is also very powerful, and that's because in capitalism today, corporations have accumulated a lot of power. And when you look at even recently, the news on the so-called inflation, I mean, really what the inflation is these corporations are making record-breaking profits and increasing the prices of nearly everything, and that's having a national impact. So the economic sector has a tremendous amount of power, and when they want to change something, it'll change, right? Change can happen in the economic sector, and it has before in the past. And the cultural sector, which is the place where we create stories and images, music, the things that are about culture, food, visual culture, Hollywood, films, TV, those shape both of these areas. And I'll give you a quick example. When I was a teenager in 1997, Ellen DeGeneres came out on TV. Ellen DeGeneres was one of the first queer characters on TV. She was the first lesbian on TV. And in the show, Ellen, she kissed her girlfriend. It was just like a peck, and that's it. And it was a big deal to have a gay character on TV. But what followed? You had Will and Grace, Queer Eye, the L Word, right? And little by little, Americans started getting used to the fact that there was queer people. There's always been queer people in our world, but when they're not represented in pop culture, then people think that they don't exist or they're allowed to hate or be homophobic. But culture was changing. It was changing rapidly. Then you had people, the first athlete come out on the cover of Sports Illustrated. You had more and more music about queerness. Imagine Ellen DeGeneres, she just pecked her girlfriend, but then in the L Word, you had, full on sexy scenes with queer women, right? And then by 2013, you had gay marriage become legal in the Supreme Court. Well, similarly, we've seen the presence of trans folks, Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black. We have TV shows like Pose, writers like Janet Mock. And today, a lot of young people identify as non-binary. That is a culture shift. And yet in the political realm, you have very anti-trans legislation, right? And that's because culture moves fast and culture changes people's imagination. And sometimes people in politics do not like how fast culture is moving. But in the realm of culture, we can put forward ideas that are going to change the way people think. And so I remember back in the day when a lot of people were climate deniers, which is actually, just so you know, climate denial, which is when politicians refuse to acknowledge that climate change exists. That was a strategy. That was a political strategy designed by Frank Luntz, who basically said, okay, just don't believe the science, refuse to believe the science. And so today, it's actually a lot harder to be a climate denier because we have created a culture where we say absolutely not. But when it comes to climate, people are still thinking polar bears, they're still thinking, melting glaciers. They're not realizing that climate crisis is happening all around us every day. It is part of our daily interactions. It's not just in the North Pole. It's not where it's cold. We have to dramatically change these ideas around climate, right? And also not just that, but people think climate change is white guys. It's Leonardo DiCaprio speaking out. It's Al Gore. It's, documentaries like Chasing Ice. And it's also not that. I mean, it is that, but it's more than that, because what has happened is that in the climate movement, we have had so many voices, especially white men, talk about climate without talking about the roots of the problem. The roots of the problem is structural racism. It is colonization. It is that there has been an ideology that has become popular in this world that has been actually truly, this is what, the colonizing countries did. They literally spread their ideas around the world, their ideas, their cultural values. And some of those cultural values were around the extraction of energy, right? Which is, you got to dig for that energy. That energy is, it has no limits, that you can simply destroy the earth to get energy. And the problem is those ideas have been adopted at the international level globally, that somehow in order to power our lives, we absolutely need this really dirty thing called oil, and we have to extract it from the ground. It is normalized, but it's not normal, because we also have the sun. The sun can completely power us. I mean, there has been literal blocking of solar campaigns, solar power. So we have a lot of work to do in culture. We have to show, my dream is that just in the way that people come out, for Black Lives Matter or Me Too, or are coming out against a lot of issues around racial and gender justice, we have to come out on climate, because climate is a racial justice issue. If we can fix climate, we are going to be fixing the health of not just this generation, but we're going to be correcting and repairing what has happened. Because again, the oil industry has been built on someone's back, and it's in someone's backyard. And those backyards are people of color, or people in the Middle East, or people in Africa who have lost their lives trying to fight the fossil fuel industry. And of course, climate change is not just caused because of the fossil fuel industry. Climate change is also caused because of animal agriculture. And we have to also talk about that. Like, why is it that we have created a food system that absolutely relies on the exploitation of animals and human beings. Because those animals in factory farms, it's a very horrible situation, but it still requires the exploitation of human beings, mostly immigrants. So I want you to remember that culture shapes both of these areas, and this is exactly why it's very powerful. Because culture, when you see these women in the WNBA, right? Who was the first person who actually spoke out against police brutality? It was Colin Kaepernick. That was culture change. Culture change leads to more culture change. This is a banner in San Francisco, the Green New Deal. Who introduced the Green New Deal? It was young people who took over Congress's offices and say, we need a Green New Deal now, right? And so when we can use the power of art, athletes are part of culture. Sports is culture. When we can disrupt, culture can disrupt. We are then injecting our philosophies into pop culture. Imagine if a lot of athletes began to wear shirts that said Green New Deal or climate justice or end oil dependency now. In the same ways, I mean, I know you've all been seeing some of those folks in Europe who are throwing a lot of paint at the art. I mean, people just need to raise the alarm. As little Greta Thunberg says, the house is on fire. The house is on fire. Global warming temperatures are so clear to us, and we're seeing the impacts of it every single day. So another philosophy that I want to share with you is the ways in which stories create other stories, right? And so if you can imagine that you're looking into the galaxy and you see a star, right? And that star is like a story. You see someone who shares their story. That star is going to inspire a lot of other stars. And then those stars are going to get connected to form a constellation. And that is what a constellation is, like a narrative. It's an idea in the sky that is going to stay present. It's going to remain in the zeitgeist of our imagination. And in many ways, Me Too was like this, right? You had one person speak out, one woman speak out, and then hundreds of women speak out, right? We saw that. We see this phenomenon that when one person shares their story, many more follow. And so we need more stories around the climate crisis. It's really, really disappointing. I work a lot in the entertainment industry, and we just published this report that from 2016 to 2020, you had less than 3% of all television shows and all films even mention climate. Okay, these are scripted films. I'm not talking about documentaries. I'm talking about TV shows that are scripted. Less than 3% mention climate. And yet Hollywood is supposed to depict the world we live in. Out of those 3%, 0.6% even mention the word climate change. So we have a real problem because stories, we're not even seeing enough stories. We need climate stories to be abundant. If we are going to address the climate crisis, we need to get it out into pop culture. And film and TV are one of the most powerful ways to do that, because it is through art that we get to shape and we get a lens of interpretation, right? And so if you can imagine that, I'm going to give you my glasses and I'm going to show you how it is that I experience pollution my entire life. And I've experienced seeing people get very sick. And especially during COVID, when COVID, which is a respiratory disease, my community had the largest rates of COVID, the highest rates of COVID in all of Alameda County, in my county. And that's no surprise when you have people with impacted lungs because of pollution. So I want to show you through my world what it was like to grow up in a home where no matter how much you clean, there's a little layer of black dust that comes back every day. And that's because of the freeways, because those trucks are burning fossil fuels to move goods that are going all over the place. But yet my community bears the brunt. And so if I can help you experience that and see that through my lens, then you will be able to see the impacts of what it means to have grown up with that, right? And also that there's no consent. There's no consent to being poisoned slowly. People in my neighborhood live 8 years less than people 2 miles up. And it's only because the folks 2 miles up who were wealthier and wider were able to tell our government to not run trucks through their neighborhood, right? And similarly, we need to see through everyone's lens. We need to be able to see through the lens of Black people in the South who are fighting against the oil industry, or who were fighting to get support after Katrina, right? We have to be able to experience it through their lens, because the reality is the climate crisis is so harsh and ugly, and we have to understand it through people's experiences. And this is why we need stories, right? This is why we need to see it on TV like something normal. And I want to talk a little bit about monoculture, because I think that monoculture is such a great metaphor for also the kind of culture we're seeing on TV currently. So first is mono. Mono is the same, right? Monoculture is destroying our environment, because the earth does not look like this. This is not normal. This is how our food production is. This is not normal. This is destroying our planet. We are destroying the soil, and we're over relying on pesticides and chemicals, mostly created from petroleum, an oil product. And this is disrupting our planet. Similarly, the culture that we see, when I go into a museum and I see 85% of the works are by white artists, when I check out Hollywood and I realize that 96% of film directors in Hollywood are white, that's monoculture. That's not how we survive as a species. We survive in biodiversity. This is why we need the Amazon. This is why we need our forests, because we need biodiversity. And I want you to always think that we are reflections of nature. Just like we need biodiversity, we need cultural diversity. Cultural diversity makes us stronger as an organism. And so if we were to live in a world where I see, stories, on TV about Native Americans, about trans people, queer people, Asians, Muslims, you have a few shows here and there, but overwhelmingly, you don't really see it, right? And so biodiversity should be our goal, always. And I think diversity gets used, sometimes it's like just a word that people just kind of roll their eyes, but I want you to think about it through a biodiverse framework, which is that a healthy system is a diverse system, right? We need the mushrooms as much as we need the redwood trees. And in our climate justice movement, we are at a time when so many diverse leaders are speaking out. Indigenous people are showing up to international conferences. Where I'm going to Egypt for the UN climate conference. Indigenous people will be there as well. And they will be protecting and speaking out for the forest. And I love this image on the bottom, right? Climate justice is land back. Let's remember that these lands were stolen. They were stolen. They were violated. And Indigenous people today make up 5% of the globe, but they protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So we absolutely need for land to be returned to Indigenous caretakers, and we need reparations to Black people because of slavery. We need to correct what had happened, and that is climate justice. Climate justice is inclusive of repairing the harms of the past. I love this image here on the left, the lower left, of the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth organizing climate movement, and how they said, we need a Green New Deal. Do your job, back the deal. It's really sad to me that young people have to tell politicians to do their job, which is basically to protect what are you going to leave for the next generation, right? And to me, this is culture change. This is cultural strategy, is when we leverage storytelling, performance. These youth, they got trained by a theater, somebody in theater, to help them figure out, where do we stand? What colors do we use? What do we wear? Right? It's a cultural intervention. And finally, I'm going to end with showing us a little bit of art. My organization, the Center for Cultural Power, we work with a lot of artists. these are some works that we commissioned for Earth Day, because we want to make sure that Earth Day is not just like, something people, it's not just something that mostly white people participate in. We want to make Earth Day as something that is really, really diverse, and that we all participate in. And so these are different works that we commissioned, and we shared them on social media. And similarly, we host events, we work with artists throughout the industry. You could see there the photo on the top, the actor Kendrick Sampson from Insecure. We organize sessions with folks in entertainment to talk about this and say, okay, folks, how are we going to change the industry? We do things at Sundance. We work with movement leaders to tell different kinds of stories around climate. This is one of my art pieces, Migration is Beautiful. And this piece talks about how, we are connected to nature. We are like butterflies. We migrate. My ancestors migrated, and butterflies migrate as well. And so in my work, I'm always using nature metaphors. I'll show you a few more before we wrap. For me, art is my primary tool. I'm a cultural organizer. I work with many other artists. I myself am a visual artist, and I'm now getting into film and TV. But for me, art is important because it is about what we're seeing, right? Visual art is what we see. And I'm always looking for how are the ways that I could help inspire people and remind them that we need them to get involved in the movement right now. Because as the IPCC has told us, we don't have a lot of time. We have about 6 years to dramatically address global warming, and to make sure that we are not hitting temperatures that are going to literally put our human species, that are going to threaten our human species. And we're not going to win on climate with just policies. We're not going to win on climate if we're just keeping this a political thing. The economic sector is going to be very slow to move on climate, because unfortunately, most of the economic sector is reliant on dirty energy. You have a few amazing companies like Patagonia, who just did this whole nonprofit thing. But the economic sector, we can't wait for them. So the cultural sector, we have to leverage culture. We have to organize artists and ensure that those who are most impacted are telling their stories. So thank you very much, everyone. Really excited to move into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Fabiana. What an exciting and invigorating talk. I'm sure this has stirred up a lot of interest in our listeners today. So I would like to invite you, the audience, to submit your questions via the Q&A button on Zoom. And I can start us off while we get some audience questions. Fabiana, I love your emphasis on culture, on art, storytelling, film, TV, as being the most powerful tool to inspire the social change these times demand. And I'm quoting you to you from All We Can Say. But especially because there's a feeling in this area in DC, that what matters are policy and politics, or perhaps even science and finance. And so my first question to you is, what role do scientists and engineers and mathematicians have in shaping this cultural strategy for the climate movement? How do you imagine their place? Do you see a place for collaboration between art and science?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? We once lived in a world where people trusted scientists. And we don't live in that world anymore. It's really, really upsetting. You have global scientists raising the alarm, and that's not producing the shifts we need. So I think that the best thing we can do, my organization is working with the IPCC this year to produce art about the IPCC report, right? So scientists and mathematicians, they will produce a lot of data and important information, but you can't really inspire people with data. You know that our minds, neuroscience teaches us that we are emotional creatures. So human beings will do things when they are moved in their emotions. And rational information speaks to our brains, but it doesn't speak to our hearts. So what we can do as artists is collaborate with scientists to understand what are the things we need to talk about, right? Oceans. Ayana Johnson, the co-editor on that book, she's a marine biologist, and she's always reminding me. She says, Favi, you got to do stuff about the ocean. If we don't have healthy oceans, we do not have a planet. And I always am like, thank you, Ayana, because she's right. She is bringing me the information, and it's up to me as an artist to translate. And I want to also emphasize that culture will shape politics, because at one point, there could be even, former President Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, right? It was okay for a Democratic president to sign an act that said that a marriage is only between man and woman, but culture changed that. So we have to understand that culture will also shape politics. That's why, you have, because politicians are either reacting to culture or they're following culture. And so we always have to recognize that as much partnerships as we can create in both sectors, in the political and economic sector, that will make us much stronger.
We have a great set of questions coming in already, so let me read one of them to you. What inspired you to take on such a role? And would you say that you see an improvement with society accepting Indigenous people?
Yeah. So what inspired me truly is that because I think the kind of thinker that I am and how I've been taught is that we have to question all the ideas that people say are normal, right? So for example, when I was growing up, people would say, oh, you're a man or a woman. Why? Who said that? In reality, there's a gender spectrum, right? Culture is so powerful, y'all. It makes us think things are real. So for example, the fact that somebody says, oh, don't cross the border. Who made that border? Nature doesn't have a border. Like really, it's a man-made border. It's not like we're paying rent to the earth. The earth is not charging us rent. The earth is not saying, oh, you get this land and you get this land. So I would always question things. And I realized, I was like, wow, we live in a world where certain bodies can get exploited and other bodies benefit from it. How did we arrive to such a society that it's normal? That's normal. The fact that so many people of color died during COVID is like, that's not normal. That is racist. And so I've always been like, how do we change our world? And you can't change our world without recognizing that we are exploiting Mother Earth. And just like my people got exploited, the earth is getting exploited. And I think one of the things that colonization did, it made us think we're separated from earth. We are completely interdependent on every single living system on this planet. And so I was inspired because I said, we can't leave the earth behind. In my own spiritual journey, I realized that the earth needs us to speak out. And also the earth needs us to love her. We need to pay attention to the trees, to all of living things, because truly, I mean, when I saw the report that like 69% of wildlife has been eliminated, it's gone. That to me is like a tremendous wake-up call that we need to value non-human life, and that we are the most powerful species on earth, and I believe in our power. So yes, I that's what inspired me. And I do think society is becoming more accepting of Indigenous people, and that's because Indigenous people are protecting life on earth. They're literally protecting 80% of our biodiversity. And I think there's a culture shift among that. So, and I'm really happy to see it.
We have another question from an audience member. As a college student, how do you recommend we get started or have some impact on the fight for climate justice? And just as an aside, you were talking about the Sunrise Movement, but I was also wondering if you could weave in and tell us more about the Center for Cultural Power and how you see its place in fostering, climate activists that are young.
Yeah. So first of all, as a college student, first of all, everyone, you all have to start with your homes. Start with your homes and what you can change. you can change your community. You can ask your city council or your cities, are they moving away from dirty energy? Are they embracing clean energy? If so, how? You know, ask your universities, are they investing in fossil fuels? They probably are. They got to stop. And also, are your universities transitioning to clean energy? And I'm not talking net zero, y'all. Net zero is a sham. You know what net zero is? It's basically you're going to pay for your carbon offsets. We have to stop producing carbon, period. We have to stop producing CO2. We can't just pay for it. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, and indigenous people say this. They say these are false solutions. The solutions is we need to stop using oil. We have to stop using dirty energy. So ask your university, what are you doing? You know, where is your food coming from? Maybe you, I mean, I think university students can organize to make sure that their universities are not supporting the fossil fuel industry. I can tell you the fossil fuel industry is in everywhere. It's in museums, it's in universities. But we have to make it, we have to make it so that people understand we can't, this is an industry that has also lied to us. Exxon knew since the 80s that this was going to be a problem. They knew that there was going to be a massive human existence problem in the 80s, and they didn't do anything about it. So I think start locally. And then I would say join local movements. You know, there's a lot of movements throughout the country, a lot of youth powered movements, or organize one, start a reading circle and start targeting one by one, start targeting your city, your university, where you live. I live in a state where my governor is like really big on climate change. So he wants to, you know, lead on climate. So we have set very ambitious goals, but the rest of the country is a different story. So it takes for the people to do it.
And then can you talk about the Center for Cultural Power and how it's fostering such dialogues and art?
So at the Center for Cultural Power, we are working with artists from throughout the country. We work with artists in the Midwest, in the South, in New Jersey, at the US-Mexico border, and throughout California. And we have a number of climate justice training programs where we're working with them to educate them on climate so that they can make content and art about climate. Because that's what also we really need, is we need folks to not just organize on climate, we need content. Like if you have social media, talk about climate, follow climate people, like make climate a part of who you are, because in reality it is. Like we every day we wake up to the sun, you know, every day we need to eat every day. Like we are completely reliant on nature. So we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it and think about how every day we can be taking moves to help nature heal, whether that's, you know, growing gardens, getting active, figuring out how, you know, with your families, you can transition to solar. There's so many things you can do, but it's really around also elevating that. You know, as a culture maker, I always tell people the biggest powerful thing you have is your story, how you tell your story about what you're doing, because in speaking out, you inspire other people as well.
I have a question from a student at UMD who is asking a little bit about the other side of that coin, of you as an activist. The question is, as an environmental science and policy major with a plan to double major in public policy, with the dream of tackling environmental issues through science and public speaking, what would be some of my biggest challenges, especially doing this as a woman of color?
Yeah. Well, first, we need a lot more women of color who can speak about science in a compelling way. We need that. So I would say, I mean, you're actually going to be facing less challenges than I face, because we're in a moment of racial reckoning. All of a sudden, everyone wants a speaker who's a woman of color. You know, there's a big demand in the climate movement, especially, for more diverse voices. And we definitely need them in science. Absolutely. I mean, I'm actually a part of a women scientist group. I'm one of the only artists in there, but they talk about, like, women from NASA and all that. They talk about that they face a lot of injustice, gender injustice around even the theft of their ideas. So I think that the I would say, like, the biggest challenges you might face are recognizing that the sciences and people who speak about environmental stuff have predominantly been white men, but you can turn that around to your advantage, because I think that as a woman of color, you are part of an impacted people. You're part of the people who are impacted by climate catastrophe. I also think that women's leadership is so important in the climate movement. I mean, there was a New York Times article that said that the most powerful change makers right now in climate are girls, like young girls. And when I go to these climate events, it's the young women who are killing it. Like, they are getting in the face of these oil executives. They're talking to their elected officials. They're organizing to get the vote out. So I just think that we just, like, the bolder folks are, the more important. So I think, La Mariah, I actually think it's just the right time. And yes, get your public speaking down, get your website down, get a coach who can teach you how to speak. And I can assure you that you will be high in demand.
What would be the biggest takeaway that you want us to walk away with in regards to the future work that should be done, or steps that should be taken?
Yeah. So there's some really good questions here. I'm reading them all, but yes, we don't have a lot of time, and at the same time, I do think culture actually moves fast. When you have something like Black Panther, the movie, like, just blow people's minds open, there is the potential. It just takes one thing. We just need one good thing, one or two good things to break people's minds open, right? I really wish Don't Look Up, which was actually it did really well on Netflix. It was Leonardo DiCaprio's film. And I actually agree with this comment by Elena Franzoy that yes, it's actually the 1%, the richest are causing the climate crisis. Let's get clear on that. Over 70% of emissions are coming from the top oil companies and from the richest people on this planet. So it's not like all of us are causing climate change, but we're the ones who are going to pay for it, right? And especially the younger generation, you all are going to really pay for it. And that's where my heart breaks, because I'm like, man, we are leaving a planet behind that is going to be a very hard place to live. So what can you do? First is that, organize yourselves, like, create circles for you all to just talk about, what does it mean to be alive in the age of climate crisis? What does it mean to be alive when you are also part of an international movement? There is an international movement that is trying to save our only home, which is our Earth. It's a really exciting time, and it's also a really scary time, because, I know you've seen those reports that say the hottest summer you think is now is going to be the coldest summer of your life, meaning that temperatures are only going to rise, and it's going to be very challenging. So I think we have to hold that together. We have to hold the grief, the fear, and also have hope together, right? And so I think talk to each other about it, like, make climate something you talk about every day, post about it, reflect about it, read about it, and also you don't just have to read these, like, science books. All we can save is an amazing amount of different essays. There's, like, a lot of comedy with climate. There's a lot of really cool things to get into. Leverage culture, start a band, work on, do some music, write a story, like, leverage your creativity. But really, you all have the power to organize. As young people, I believe in the wisdom and radical thinking of young people, because you guys are bold. You guys haven't been jaded by life. And so use that to really, I just think, always include Mother Earth, include animals, talk about how wildlife is being destroyed. Consider, going plant forward. That means, I'm not saying, cut meat 100%, plant forward, prioritize plants, grow a garden, organize in your school. There's a lot of things you can do. And as you do them, you will learn that people are really hungry to talk about this. We really, really need spaces to talk about this and process it, and also give ourselves the courage to be able to do what's going to be needed of us to solve the climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Fabiana. I think that's a really inspiring note to end on. Thank you so much for your talk and taking the time to answer student questions.
Great, thank you everyone. And I am going, if somebody, I'll share this with the host and panelists. If somebody could share my Instagram, I am Fabiana1 on Instagram. I'm going to be talking a lot about climate starting November 5th when I head to Egypt. So if you want to follow my stories, I'll be interviewing some of the most amazing influencers, and you'll get a sense there. I think if you watch my stories, you're gonna become a climate activist. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for this incredible talk and engagement with students and with the questions that came through. Thank you, Sharda, for your participation in the program today. And I also want to shout out thanks to the Honors College and University Honors for their co-sponsorship of the event. In addition to Fabiana's Instagram, I also want to put in a plug for our first year book website. That's fyd.umd.edu for more information about our first year book, about its contributors and the resources for getting involved in the fight for climate justice. So thank you all for being here. Great to see you. Take care.
Thank you.